So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup, and today we're talking about how to develop keywords for a specific deck, for your deck, so that you can be working with interpretations that really reflect the specifics and the details and the unique essence of the cards that you're working with. This seems to be something that I've done. It is something that I've done from the very beginning because this is how my teacher taught me to read cards back in 1991, and I plus I took to it very, very quickly because I had a degree in English, which meant that, and with a lot of theater background too, and between the two of those things, I had studied a lot of symbolism. Plus, I just had a natural interest in symbolism. But the theater professor that I worked with primarily encouraged us to see within the action of a scene on stage, encouraged us to see the static image and the symbols that were present in it. And that really helped in two ways. I don't think people usually interpret theater that way. But it helped me to be able to kind of find how a scene unfolds as things move, because the symbolism changes as those static images move, and as the actors move around the stage, the symbols change, and that really influenced how I eventually designed staging when I was a director. But likewise, when I learned tarot after I graduated, it helped me see the static images in the cards as snapshots of a bigger moving scene. And so that really influenced how I viewed cards, I think in a way that maybe not everybody got from the very beginning. And my teacher taught me what I'm going to teach you today, which is how to look at the image and derive the meaning from the image on the card as opposed to from a book. One of the things that kind of a series of influences on my training, one of the outcomes of that was that I eventually came to believe and to understand that the cards themselves don't have any specific meaning. And I think the cards don't have meaning until they turn up in context of a querent, a question, and other cards. My teacher told me not to read single cards. So I came into this sense that the cards needed, no card by itself has a meaning. It has to have a context. And I actually discourage in my students the idea that a card should have some kind of basic meaning. I'm the annoying teacher that people ask me, what does this card mean? I'm like, I don't know, nothing. Did you ask a question? It doesn't have any meaning at all. Well, what does the Knight of Wands mean? I don't know. You know, I kind of knew for her because all she ever asked about was relationships. But I'm like, another one is going to leave. Don't worry about it. But I didn't, because I'm just like, it doesn't have a meaning until we have a question. The other thing, of course, is that the card meanings differ according to, and somebody has already mentioned this, but the card meanings differ according to the deck lineage, according to the illustrations that are on the deck, according to the reading style. Different people have different reading styles, and that'll change how they interpret the cards. And there's just lots of factors that will change how a card is read or how somebody understands a card. One of the main things to keep in mind, though, is, and I teach this on day one of my beginning class, is really being aware of what your personal stuff is, your personal relationship to the cards, your personal prejudices and junk and shadow things and desires, and make sure that you're not reading those into the cards, because that's very, very different from developing intuitive meanings that are universally applicable. And so you do want to make sure you're aware of that and releasing that stuff. So we're not going to do a class on that. I have exercises on that. That's not part of what we're doing today, but it is really relevant once we get to the idea of developing developing that personal connection to the cards. It is true that once we get into a specific lineage, we do get common interpretations, and the commonality of that can start to become a meaning for the card. But even if there are general commonly accepted meanings, it doesn't mean that you have to use that. In fact, frequently you are losing the essence of the image that you're working with and of the deck that you're working with when you try to plaster on those universal meanings that kind of aggregate around a certain image. Also, I just noticed that we end up with really common meanings that I'll start to read everywhere. I'll just read it on every blog post, everybody that, you know, does a video about what a card means or something like that. And I'm just like, where are they even getting this? If you really look at the image, that is not supported. And so that's kind of fun to start to really play with this, really examine those images, really question whether the thing that you've always heard is true or not, and start to put that together and figure out, where do these images come from? Was a mistake made along the way? Is there a coherence to the entire system, or does it start to fall apart? Basically, there's in terms of where the card meanings come from, I think that there's an interpretive combination that's based on, I'm calling it the card rank, but I mean the position in the sequence, whether it's a minor arcana sequence of ace through 10, a court card sequence of page through king, or a major arcana sequence of fool through world. There, you know, and things can move around without a doubt, but there is some kind of standard sequence. And so where the card fits in that sequence is part of what its meaning is based on. The image itself, which is primarily what we're going to end up working with, but the image itself usually gets the rest of that's probably the first thing. It gets the bulk of the meaning based on the image. So when we take that image away and start to work with pip decks that are unillustrated, when we start working with correspondence decks like what Lauren has, that just has a lot of correspondences, and they might be shown in a picture form as opposed to written out as a word or as a simple glyph, but they're not a illustration, and that's a difference. And so a correspondence deck will be read a little bit differently. Obviously, the esoteric decks, which are built on correspondences, is another example of that. And those are three, I think those to me are the three basic lineages, is the pip decks, which are in a Marseille style, the illustrated decks, which are like a Rider-Waite-Smith, and the correspondence decks, which would be exemplified by Golden Dawn decks, the Toth deck, and the correspondence decks like that Tarot of Magical Correspondences. So working with, I'm primarily going to be talking about the illustrated decks. Interpretive combination, card rank, which is the position in the sequence, the image itself, the symbols that are in the image or used as correspondences, memorized correspondences that may not be illustrated on the deck, and the title of the card, or if there's a written keyword or title, either a memorized one or one that's written on the card. Those are all things that will come together to form an interpretation. There might be other things that I'm missing, but I think that's the bulk of how we determine what a card means. One of the things that I have found is a card meaning usually includes advice, and I don't necessarily find that maybe in some of the older books I have, like from the 70s, but my teacher got me a copy of this. I don't think this is the same copy he gave me. I think I've lost it and given it away and repurchased it multiple times. But anything by Eden Gray. the book has been printed a number of times and goes under a couple different titles, and there's slight variations in it. But my teacher did give me this. So the tarot, one of the tarot books by Eden Gray, and so that's kind of how I first learned meanings. And basically how she starts is with a description of the card, and that was really important to me because with the first sentence being the card description got me to look at the card, and that's how I ended up working with developing my own meanings. Partly just because this is how a tarot book does it. The first thing they do is describe the card, and then they give the meaning. This will say, I've got the Eight of Pentacles open right here, and it says apprenticeship, skill in material affairs, craftsmanship, skill in both handiwork and business, sometimes merely in the preparatory stage, employment or commission to come. And so that doesn't have so much the advice, but what I hear in modern interpretations and modern reading styles is a lot of people telling you, giving you advice based on something. And this is one of the things that I actually discourage. I will give advice in readings, believe me, I will be happy to tell you what to do. But I read the cards as they lay. So like the Eight of Swords is an example that I used, and it's one of my favorites. Everybody says you got to get unstuck. And I'm like, maybe you need to get unstuck. Maybe getting stuck is where you need to be. And we just talked about this in my last numbers class. You know, maybe what you need is to reduce so that you can focus better. And if you have to tie yourself to your chair at your desk to get your work done, then maybe that's what you should be doing. So I try to avoid simplistic advice, like all you have to do is reach out and grab a sword and cut the bonds and you'll be free again. Maybe she's trying to reduce all of her thoughts, which are the swords, so that the water which is beneath her feet the tide is moving, whether it's going out or coming in. Maybe she needs to connect more with her emotions. And so those are things we can learn from the card image without simplifying it into advice. So that's the one thing I don't ever do, is simplify the card into advice. The meaning is, I think a meaning for a card is a little more comprehensive, a little more unified, and sometimes can be more nuanced. I think a card meaning is more like a dictionary definition. And I've got some examples here. The Four of Cups, and that's the guy sitting there, his back is against the tree, 3 cups are in front of him, 1 is held out in the air. It's usually people say something like, you are dissatisfied. Why do we know that? His arms are crossed and his head is down. And so dissatisfied comes up. Discontent comes up. Ambivalent or apathetic comes up. You're dissatisfied with what you have, which is the 3 cups that he's facing or can see, but you are ignoring new opportunities, which is the 4th cup, which is usually held out of sight. Someone is offering something, accept it. That's typical advice that you would hear for that card. You might need to meditate on the situation, and that is a correspondence to a similar looking image, which is the image of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, enlightened under the Bodhi tree. And so he sits under a tree and achieves enlightenment. Now, of course, part of that is that he is touching the ground, and this character is not touching the ground. He has his arms folded. So that could get into, if you like working with advice, that might be something to add in. If you touch the ground, you will know what you want. That could be a really interesting interpretation for that card. Now, of course, all of this changes the very second you go to another deck, because sometimes the 4th cup is what they're looking at and the other 3 cups are hidden behind them, like in the Morgan Greer deck. Sometimes they're looking at the 4th cup and the 3 cups are visible in front of them, such as the Aquarian deck. and so on and so forth. So where the character is positioned, whether or not the tree is there, where they're looking, all of those things. Yes, thank you. So somebody's holding, what are you holding up there, Reese?
The fourth cup is just on his head. So
I love it.
Is he not seeing it? I mean, it's literally on his head. So how can you not see it?
It's like having your glasses on your head.
Right. Where are my glasses? Oh yeah, where are my, oh, they're right here.
I can't find my glasses anywhere. Oh, it's on your head. That's how I would interpret that card. And because I don't have my glasses on, I can't see anything else either. So I can't see my other 3 sets of glasses, which are right in front of me. So, okay, cool. Awesome. I love it. I love it.
Joy,
So, yeah.
you just said he's not on the ground. He's sitting on his butt on the ground. I don't understand.
Touching with his hand.
Oh, with his hand. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things of Buddha, when he got enlightened, he was sitting on the ground, but he touched the ground with his hand.
Okay.
And so that's what I was referring to. I'm pretty sure I have that myth right, but I always always fact check everything I say. Yeah. So for me, keywords, if the meaning is a dictionary definition, the keywords are like a thesaurus. And so we're looking at single words, short phrases. They're usually based on the same things: the card, the image, the card rank or its position in the sequence, symbols, the title, correspondences, things like that. Keywords are a lot less likely, I think, to include a moral, a theme, or advice. They tend to be to the point, simplifying and clarifying. Likewise, they can be one note. And to me, it's like a list of synonyms. So for instance, keywords that I commonly use for the 4 of Cups: ambivalence, apathy, meditation, contemplation. I think a lot of people tend to use those keywords for that card. Again, it really changes depending on the deck. I love the druid craft. The guy's leaning like this and his other hand is like this. He's just almost flipping you the bird. And it's like, oh, fabulous. Okay, I see where you're at. I'm not going to talk to you now because I'm just going to get something started and I don't want to go there. So I'm going to leave you alone. The other thing to work with is the idea of card titles. And to me, if the meanings are dictionary definitions and the keywords are like a list of synonyms, I would say the card titles are more like categories within a thesaurus, or more likely, I actually work with them as a continuum. And so the card titles are formal phrases. They're used only in some reading styles. And you can think of the titles of the majors as card titles: the Magician, the High Priestess, the Empress. That's an example of card titles. The Golden Dawn system provides a comprehensive set of card titles for the full deck. There are other systems that will provide card titles as well. I'm probably just not very familiar with them. The Thoth deck has words written on the minors. I consider those to be keywords more than titles, but maybe somebody that's a strong Thoth reader might want to argue that with me. So I'd be happy to consider it otherwise. The thing with the Golden Dawn titles, which really helps to understand what their purpose is that in the minor arcana, they all are called the Lord of something. And so the Lord of something is what rules or manages or oversees something. So if the 4 of Cups, well, I'll give a different example. The 4 of Cups is weird. A lot of them are weird. If the 2 of Wands is the Lord of Dominion, that card is not, a lot of people, dominion, if you look it up in the dictionary, a synonym for it is domination. So I've heard a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, I've heard people call that card domination, and I don't agree with that interpretation personally. You can use any interpretation you want. Whatever works for you is going to work with your if it works with your deck, if it resonates for you, any meaning will work. However, it's not one that I use. I look at the Two of Wands in terms of dominion as being, what is your dominion? So the titles always bring up a question for me. What is your dominion? What is your area that you manage? And I use the Legacy of the Divine. So that deck, it's got the two wands are parallel to each other. And then there's a box here and a box here. And there's a key that crosses and kind of touches, it overlaps both of the boxes. The two wands have ribbons that swirl around. The ribbons don't connect, cross, or touch in any way. So the wands are totally separate. You could literally cut out each wand separately from that card and they would be two separate pieces. The boxes have the key crossing over them. And so it's like, this wand is in charge of this box, this wand is in charge of this box. Don't mess with the other person's box. And that applies in work. You know, stick to what you're doing. If you're tempted to get into somebody else's area, don't. If you're already in somebody else's area, probably stick to your own area. Let them be responsible for it. If you have to get into somebody else's area because they're not taking care of it, you need somebody else doing that. You need to have somebody that will manage their own area. Same thing at home. You know, whose dominion is this area of the house or that area of the house, or this part of the chores or that part of the chores, or whatever. Anything that you look at, you can determine the dominion. What is the area that you rule? And then you can break that down into, this is your job, that's their job, and never the twain shall meet. And so that's how I explore those titles, is where are you on the dominion? Are you taking charge of what you need to take charge of? Are you not, are you taking charge of things that you don't need to take charge of? I think I said that right. You know, but explore that continuum of not doing your work and needing to do more of what your work is, or doing your work perfectly the way you should, or doing your work in everybody else's, which is the other extreme of that. I'll give you the Four of Cups title just because I'm doing the Four of Cups for everything else, but it's the Lord of Blended Pleasure, which is an odd thing to think about. And when you go through all the different correspondences and work through it, it actually comes up with a pretty interesting interpretation. In fact, I have my article on this card on my blog, completelyjoyous.com, and if you look up Four of Cups, you'll find this card. Four of Cups, it's Moon in Cancer, or Moon ruling the third decan of Cancer, but there's only so many words you can have in a title online and have SEO like it. So the Four of Cups is the Lord of Blended Pleasure, and so it's like, what is your pleasure blended with? Is it diluting it? Or is it diluting it to a degree that weakens it, or is it diluting it to make it more palatable? And that's what I like about these titles and this continuum, is it doesn't come up with advice. It comes up, or it can come up with advice, but before it does, it lays out all the extremes. Do you need to blend it with something in order to achieve your goal? Once we get into some of the Kabbalistic interpretations, that really opens up considerably, but we're not going to do that today. Of course, the pleasure is related to whatever the querent asks about. The Thoth title for that one is Luxury. That takes you in a totally different direction. So that's why it's like, there is no meaning for a card. You know, if you study even more than one lineage of cards, you'll immediately start to come up against contradictions that are unresolvable, and that just lets you realize just right away that there is no one meaning for a card. You can work within a lineage if you want to, or you can go your own direction. Now we're on to the section of developing your own keywords for your deck. And I have a very simple process. It's taken me years to develop it, because it's kind of what I do, but it's what I do naturally, but it's what it took me years to realize that other people didn't do it naturally. And time again, and that is describe the card. And again, I started out with this Eden Gray book, and the very first thing she does is describe every card. And so I was familiar with that technique. One of my first times, well, not the first time, but early on when I made more of a concerted effort to really be a tarot reader and be a professional tarot reader and do events and stuff, I started going to participating in regular psychic fairs. And I showed up at one, and I'd been teaching regularly, but I hadn't been doing readings for a while for other people. And that's just a weird experience to be out of that and to go back into it. And somebody asked a question, a card turned up, it was the Three of Cups. I went blank. I had no idea what to say. And I got a client, you know, that's fine if I'm reading for myself. I can journal all day long. I can sit and stare at the card for as long as I want. I had somebody paying me right here, sitting in front of me, and I had nothing to tell them. And so I just was like, there's three ladies and they're dancing and there's food. It looks like three friends hanging out. How are things going with you and your friends? Oh my God, well, there's one friend, blah, 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 blah. And like, okay, so we hit something. But that was literally how I got started with the card. And I really recommend that universally as a way to approach a tarot reading, is just start describing the card. As you do it, something will start to click. You can't describe every detail of the card without eventually hitting something that clicks for you. But one of the things that happened when I started having students do this is that they would immediately go for the emotional component. Well, everybody seems happy. Well, he looks sad. And then we would get such simplistic and nebulous interpretations that it wasn't worthwhile, because there's only so many emotions to go around. And you know, unless somebody's got like some like massive ego, that would be me, I suppose. I don't know where that one came from. Unless somebody has some kind of massive vocabulary, finding a different emotional content for every single card is going to be a real challenge. And so I developed a system that makes it a lot easier to figure out that card description. And it is very simply, who is the character? Start with the character. Who is the character? And what are they doing? There's three more questions, but I want to stop there because those are the two most important. What is the character and what are they doing? And so once you've got a character in your scene, or multiple characters, and then once you see what their actions are, you've got an immediate scene, like in theater. And a scene is something that we can all relate to. People interact with each other, people do things on their own. You know, if we've got three ladies dancing, that's different than three ladies sitting around with their backs to each other looking glum with their arms crossed. You know, it's different from three ladies, you know, going shopping, you know, in the same aisle with their big carts, and you know, at the same time. That doesn't work. You know, the third lady can't get through because the other two ladies are blocking the aisle. You know, so it's like, what is the action? And once you find those two things, you can find the meaning for any card.
So I have a quick question.
Okay, yeah.
So if you are working with a card that doesn't have a person in it, but it's just like a scene, would you just describe that scene?
Yeah, I try to find, and even in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, there are a few cards that don't have a person. I try to kind of interpolate where the person would be in relationship to this scene. Is the person viewing the scene? Is the person like the Eight of Wands? Sometimes I see the character as being the symbol itself. I think of those Eight of Wands as coming in for landing. And so to me, I see Superman, like, you know, with his arms out, like kind of like coming in at an angle, about to swoop in and land and save the day or something. That's how I see it. It helps to be slightly crazy so that you can see things like this in cards. And so, yeah, I try to figure out, are the suit icons, do they represent a person in the way that they're arranged or grouped, or is there an implication of a person in the scene? Some decks just don't work, and those I think are much harder to read and much less revelatory of interesting, useful interpretations, applicable, concrete interpretations. I've got an article on this on my website too. I have a post that I talk about the poetics, and Aristotle's thing is primarily the character and the plot is a series of actions, and those are the most important things for understanding drama. It's also the most important things for understanding tarot. And so so who's the character and what are they doing? You'll get the vast majority of your interpretation just looking at that. But the other three questions are, where are they? What is the environment? Are they outside? Are they inside? Is it nighttime? Is it daytime? Are they, you know, a fascinating interpretation of the Six of Cups, again, in the Druidcraft, the guy is inside the building in the dark, looking out a window onto a bright, sunny scene of two children playing together. And what a wonderful way. A lot of times that card is, a lot of times people will associate that card with memory, and that is such a good way of looking at that idea, because the person is separated. The primary character, the children are no longer the central characters. The primary character is now separated from the actual action that's happening and is just observing. And that's a really good illustration of remembering something. There are a variety of interpretations that you can take, and I based that interpretation of that scene based on an existing keyword I already had for the card. You know, if you don't have that existing keyword, you might go another way with the interpretation, and that's fine too. If you make a mistake and come up with a meaning that doesn't work, as you do readings, and doing readings is the only way you'll ever learn the deck, as you do readings, it will become clear that your interpretation is not consistently fitting. And so then you start to evolve it. And that's the only way you can do it, is by getting started, trying it out, and seeing where it goes. So where are they? What is the mood or atmosphere? And this is where you can start to get into some of your emotional words. You know, what's the mood? Does it seem happy and bright and gay? Does it seem dismal and restricted and threatening? You know, there's all those different types of atmospheres or moods. That's the emotional content of the card. And that's where people want to go first, but I encourage people to hold off until they've identified some of these other things. And then the very final step is to ask, what are the props and decorations in the scene? And those things will be interpreted sometimes just on their own. Either one, they're directly involved in the scene and the person is using the prop, in which case usually that goes under the action. But the other decorations sometimes will have a relevant meaning, in which case you can address that separately. You might not have to address the action of the scene in order to get relevance out of the decoration or the prop. Lauren, probably that's going to be the best way to read a strictly correspondence-based deck. First of all, does anybody have any questions?
I do, Joy. I'm sitting here looking at this Four of Cups, and I noticed there's a hole in the tree. So would you bring that hole that's in the tree into the reading?
That would be under props and decorations. That would come under that last category, unless you feel like the character is interacting with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Or it could, I mean, it might be under environment. And I'm trying to think of that Rider-Waite-Smith card, and I don't remember that personally, so I'd have to look at it again. Is it the Rider-Waite-Smith you're looking at, or is it another deck?
Yeah, it is the Rider-Waite deck.
Okay.
There is a hole there. I never noticed it myself.
Awesome. I love it.
Out there.
The most powerful understandings of cards I've ever gotten have always been from somebody that's never seen a tarot deck before. In the Rider-Waite-Smith 5 of Wands, no, 5 of Pentacles, I have this up on my blog too. Meditations on the 5 of Pentacles is what it's called. In the Rider-Waite-Smith 5 of Pentacles, due to probably a printing area, which Reniscesso says that it doesn't count if it's a printing error, but I think everything counts. The crutch that the guy is leaning on is broken. And what happens because it's broken is that the top part of the crutch is separated from the bottom part, and his hand is around the bottom part. It looks like the Ace of Wands reversed. Fascinating. Somebody that had never seen a tarot deck, didn't really, he was an engineer. I worked with a bunch of engineers before, so he was curious, which a good scientist will be curious. But maybe a little more skeptical than the usual. And he was like, well, what's it mean that the crutch is broken? And I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, I never noticed that before. It's like brilliant, brilliant. You know, I always look at the 9 of Wands as a fence. I see those wands in the background as being a barrier, and the guy standing in front of it with the 9th wand, you know, protecting that barrier. There, it's like definite line in the sand there. And I had again that same group of people. It was a different engineer. He was a PhD student, and he was, or I don't know what's master's, PhD, something, but at any rate, he was looking at through one of my decks, my Robin Wood, and the Robin Wood, those wands all have crystals at the top, and they look really pretty, and there's light coming out of them. I said, well, what does it look like to you? And he said, it looks like flowers. And I'm just thinking that's wrong. This is clearly a fence. Everybody I've ever asked this question to always says it's a fence. And so we went on, we talked about some other things, and I came back to it again. I said, well, so what does it look like to you? He said, flowers. And it broke open a brand new interpretation for me that I'd never understood before. And it's like, yeah, it's a fence, but you can have a picket fence, which is beautiful and inviting with a cute little gate and flowers along it, or you can have a security fence, which is not inviting and which is protective. And all of a sudden that card opened up for me, and the 9 of Wands became about boundaries. And it's like, where are your boundaries? Do you have a security fence up that's keeping other people from approaching? Or do you have a welcoming picket fence that says, this is the line, once you cross it, you're in my territory, but I welcome you to enter, just know that you've crossed into my territory. And it just changed the entire meaning of the card for me. Then I started reading with the Legacy of the Divine. That card is even different. The 9 wands are arranged like a fence, but they don't go all the way across the card. But the guy is kneeling down. He's chained to a big stone, like a big flat stone type of thing. He's kneeling and offering that 9th wand to somebody that's out of the picture. And I always say, what are you in service to when that card comes up? It's like, who is the thing or the idea or the person that is outside the frame of this card that you are offering that wand to? Who are you in service to? I've got a blog post on that one too, 9 of Wands. That's Moon in Sagittarius. And I talk about the Greeks being in Troy and all of that stuff, because Moon is home and Sagittarius is foreign land, and the Greeks were in Troy for like 9 years besieging Troy, just kind of sitting outside the gates waiting for something to happen. So anyway, that's that card. Those are a number of interpretations you can use. Let's go ahead and do some examples. I've given you a lot of examples that I work with. Let's see some of your examples. Reese, what's one you want to look at?
Okay, here, we'll just do this one because this one's kind of nice and sweet. Okay, so it's the Two of Cups.
And think about those questions. Think about your questions of who are the characters, what are they doing, what's the environment, mood and atmosphere, and eventually what are the props and decorations, which we don't have a lot, but we have a little bit and it's really relevant. So go ahead, Reese, and describe the card.
Okay, so it is, okay, so it's two, it's two hands, right? We don't see any faces, genders, anything. It's just two
Nice.
hands. It's let's see, a right hand and a left hand. They're coming out of, they each have their own cup that's kind of spilling over with liquid. Is kind of spilling over. I guess I could do this with the camera. Okay, so it's kind of spilling over onto the table.
Yep.
And they are doing a pinky promise.
Yes.
Pinky swear, which, you know, I think we've all probably done it as kids at some point.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a very like sincere, like childlike, like an innocent promise. Like I don't know, there's no other distraction. Like the focus is on that emotional promise of whatever, friendship, love, teamwork. Okay.
Well, and so this is what we want to do is we want to try to release all the other things that you know about that card. For now, just to understand this deck, we want to release the other things. Later, and this is in my conclusion notes, whether or not we'll end up having time for me to go over them, I don't know. So I'll just say it now. Later, eventually, you'll build a full, highly extensive kind of multilingual set of definitions. You'll have, and this is what I recommend you do, that you have like a full set of interpretations for at least 6 decks that are unique to those decks. And once you've done that, then something somewhere along the lines there, something will just open up and you'll have the right meaning, you know, coming through when you see that whole, that context of question, queer, and other cards. So let's not know that this card is titled love. Let's not know that that normally it shows a romantic scene. Let's just stick to the image itself, and we've got 2 hands doing a pinky swear. And that's your 2 characters, 2 hands, 2 people, pinky swear. And so that's your bulk of your interpretation. And so your first instinct was to go towards childhood. And so describe more like what it's like to do a pinky swear. Why would you do it? What's important about it? Just riff off of that for a second.
Well, I mean, I guess my main word would almost for this card would be promise.
Promise.
Like
okay.
that would be, I mean, just really quickly, I think I would assign this card the keyword of promise.
Yeah. I promise that I'll do something, you know,
Sure.
yeah. Yeah, and that's the reason I like that is that it works with a pinky swear, but it does, as a promise, it does work out. It does very easily weave into other 2 of Cups cards.
Right.
And you don't have to do that. It's much, I think I really like Tammy. Just know, like Tammy is new to tarot, and so she keeps coming in with all of these people that have been studying it for years. But Tammy, know that you're better off being brand new and not having other stuff cluttering your brain, and being able to really see everything fresh. That is the best place ever to be. And that's why I recommend getting new decks and trying decks that challenge you and things like that, just because it helps you to get back into that beginner's mind. But yeah, promise is really beautiful and works throughout other meanings eventually. As like, if this was your first deck, eventually you would find how that worked into other cards as well. Address now in terms of the environment, they look like they're sitting on a table and they have overflow. Do you want to address that?
Let's see. So it's so interesting. I mean, it looks like the hands are coming out of the cup. So so basically, if it's overflowing, there is a distribution of the liquid that was in the cup when the hands came through.
Yep.
Which means that the cups were pretty full to begin with.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm getting all like Neil deGrasse Tyson on you guys, like with gravity and physics. But anyways, we go deep here in the Seattle room. Anyways, I don't, does anybody else have anything to add? I mean, I can go on forever. I'm a Gemini. I can just talk forever. But maybe.
Abundance and, oh shoot, it just left. An agreement.
Agreement and abundance. I love it.
Oh, agreement. That's a good one.
Yeah. And what I like about it is that the cups are separate, but now the overflow has connected them in a little pool. So yeah, so those are really good interpretations. And promise, agreement, mingling.
Maybe connection.
Yeah, something, I would use a watery word.
Oh.
That's mingling or merging of waters, but whatever the word is eluding me right now, but mingling or something like that.
Confluence.
They look
confluence.
They look like they're being planted. Like I haven't been able to see the larger view, so I can't tell what the roots look like. It's sort of like they're amputated, or I don't know, but they look like they're hands that have been planted, so the whole thing is something that would grow. And whoever said confluence, I was trying to think of a word, like I came up with grafting, but that's not what it is. But it's like hybrids are stronger together. That kind of.
Yeah. I love that. Hybrids are stronger. Yeah. So those are all good. Those are all good keywords that we can use for that card.
Can I say something? So I have like slightly different interpretation. So I'm wondering if to me, I saw like commitment, but is the commitment coming from a very emotional place?
Yes, yeah, right.
Because
of the water, right? The emotion.
Yeah.
And
I guess in my own mind, I was thinking that might not make the commitment whole, but that's really a judgment, because it could be strong emotion of really strong love. So I guess I just caught myself.
Good.
Giving advice, right? But just saying it's from strong emotion. Emotion is not good or bad.
Right.
But this commitment is coming out of strong emotion.
Well, and if you're neutral in your words, the person feels it. That's the thing you have to remember about the querent, is that they are feeling it accordingly to what is relevant to them. So if you say strong emotion, and strong emotion to them means, fights and antagonism and maybe lustful passions that are taking them the wrong direction, they'll hear strong emotions as it is relevant to them. And if you're talking to somebody that just has a very deep, lasting love and that knows the intensity of that love, they'll hear strong emotions the way that's appropriate for them. So yeah, you're totally safe in saying strong emotions and then not having to put the judgment call on it, because they know.
So it's how you say strong emotions. So you have to say strong emotions very neutrally.
Right. Yeah. It's just a neutral thing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that makes, I think it's another reason that my readings tend to be received really well, is that anything good or bad, I can I just feel I can maintain a sense of neutrality during the entire reading. It's just like, okay, somebody's like out to get you and they're really horrible. I mean, I could see all kinds of really bad things in the cards, but just be like, okay, I see somebody's out to get you. They don't like you at all. They really want to undermine you. Who would that be? And they're like, oh, I know exactly who that is. And we talk about it. And, it's not a big deal. So, let's do another card before we end. Who else has a card they want to bring up? Anybody else have a deck with them that they want to look at a specific card?
The newest one that I have is the Mythical Goddess Tarot.
I love that deck.
Yeah, it's a great deck, and so it's all women. And the one that I'm always fascinated with that keeps coming up is the Crone. Yeah, it's the Crone of the Sea, which is the King of Cups, because it's all women that kind of go with it. But it's really cool. The reason that I really like this deck, first off, is it definitely has a lot more femininity than masculinity, like the older decks do. But what I also like about it is it links up with, obviously, mythical goddesses. So if you know your mythology and not just Greek and Roman, but any of all religions, it really kind of goes within it. But what I find interesting is I have a completely different interpretation of it compared to what the King of Cups is.
So good. Let's go ahead and talk about that then. Court cards, I have an article on this too. I call it 3 types of tarot cards, and then immediately have to explain that I'm not talking about the lineages, but the 3 types of cards are the portrait cards, the archetype cards, and the scenic cards, or the action cards. And so the action cards are typically similar to the pips, but they're where somebody is taking it and doing something, a character is doing something. The portrait cards is where they're sitting have their portrait taken, which is the court cards typically. And then the archetype cards are the major arcana typically. When you get into some of the more oracle decks in particular, but also even some of the more kind of oracle leaning tarot decks, they go way overboard with the portrait cards and put portraits onto almost all the minor arcana. Portrait cards are by far the hardest to read, and so they're beautiful, but they're totally useless. In my not so humble opinion. So but at any rate, go ahead, Jennifer. Knowing that this is a portrait card will be a little bit harder to find an action in it. What do we get in terms of character and action?
Okay, so the the woman is obviously we're dealing with a water card aspect, and she is kind of like, it's very dark, so it's kind of a clouded moon, so you can't tell if it's a full moon or a half moon, it's got to be most likely a full or a quarter, because there is light, but it's just completely clouded over. The reason that I also like this too is with the other court cards, it goes from child to adolescent to mother to crone. So to me, what that kind of represents, going back through all of those, is you're kind of not necessarily at the end, but at end of life, but at the end of like wisdom of you, because I mean, you think about, like, the older you get, the more you know, and people say, what would you say to your younger self, and kind of roll within that. At the bottom of the card, it also has the term to resurrection. So I think for myself, looking at the Rider-Waite or even the top deck, that having that male component really puts me in a masculine, I definitely look at masculine and femininity, whereas with these, just because it's one, I don't really look at one way or the other. So she also has a snake wrapped around her arm.
Okay, good.
And so, and what I also like too is if you look at her hair, it's straight, it's kind of wavy and straight, but then there's also kind of curls within it. And what that, when I look at this card and when I, you know, because I didn't read the book when I first looked at it, I just was like, okay, what am I seeing? Like all the questions you're asking, what am I seeing? How do I feel? You know, all of this. And what I like about it is even though the background is completely dark, she isn't. She's lighter. So it's almost like there's a spotlight on her, even though it's not coming from the back. So what that tells me is that it's that charge and move forward kind of component, that you're kind of leaving stuff behind to try and move forward.
Nice. Okay, so good. So, and that's a good interpretation. There's a lot to work with, and you've pulled out a lot of stuff, but your main interpretation is based on the light and the dark and the idea that she's stepping into a spotlight. So there's your action, which is that's really good because it is really hard to find those actions in the portrait cards, and you found it, and it's stepping into the spotlight. And so moving forward, moving towards, and moving and there's a corresponding moving away from the darkness, and that's the resurrection. And of course, I am assuming that this card is Scorpio, which goes with all of that, and so and is the King of Cups. And so we have, and those cards are all marked with their astrological correspondence. And so yeah, that's a really nice way of looking at that Scorpio. And just compare that card and the symbols that go around with that title, Resurrection. The idea of stepping out of the darkness and into a new light, the idea of the snake, which is shedding its skin and rebirth, putting it in the context of the sequence, which is that she's the crone, she's the oldest, she's the one that has the most experience and therefore wisdom. And so that that this rebirth is based on experience and knowledge, probably. I just think because she's older. And compare that to Reese's blank death card, which is also Scorpio, and also is not all black, it is all white. So there are there's some very interesting I think, as my mind tumbles through them, there's some very interesting correlations between the two, and yet at the same time very, very different. So it's called the Urban Tarot, and it's in the Thoth lineage. This is the 5 of Cups, and it's a hutch with 5 cups that are hanging, but there's something's broken on the floor. Yeah, there's a vase of flowers that's broken on the floor. It looks like there might be room for a 6th cup, so maybe a 6th cup fell and knocked other things off, or I'm not sure. Or they have a cat. Yeah, I know. That's a very
okay, Joyce. So who is the character in that card? What are they doing? What is the character?
The cat. The cat came, and the cat has destroyed, and the action is the destruction of the situation. There's a lot of symbols. There's
what's on the floor? What's on the floor?
There is a cup. The cup did fall, it's really hard to see. There's something over here that might be the cup, or it might just be, because it's so off in the corner, it's hard to say if that's what that is. This here is a vase that is broken. That's the bottom of the vase. Those are the broken pieces, and those are the flowers.
And what's in the hutch underneath the cups?
Well, that's what I was looking at. There's some dishes that are in disarray. like not situated. It could also, it's partly, it's both, it's catabolic and anabolic for those that have been studying Kabbalah with me, because it looks like they were putting the hutch, they were filling the hutch, and then something happened and went wrong, and the cup fell and things got broken. So it looks like they were trying to put it together, and then the destruction happened. There's a framed, so besides the dishes in the bottom, there's a framed picture or portrait or something like that. The other thing that this makes me think of is an earthquake.
That's what I was thinking, an earthquake. Yeah, that's
I've
what I
never
thought.
lived through one, but I've seen them on TV, and and I think this is the type of thing that happens. And so that might be, it might be, in terms of our usual character, it might be a man against nature plot, where nature is the character and the earthquake has destroyed the important, it's a combination of, I think it's the Thanksgiving dishes that go in hutches, right? This is not your everyday set of dishes in a hutch. This is a Thanksgiving dishes. And so with the portrait in there as well, it brings to mind legacies or heirlooms or memories or family. Family would fit with the cups. I think of those things, family might fit with the cups theme the best. And so it seems like destruction that's tearing apart family. External destruction that tears apart families and memories.
Maybe it's more of like an emotional earthquake, or like a, you know, like a thoughts or feelings kind of earthquake, like you're shook, you know, because something happened.
For me, I always say, you know, when a friend of mine, you know, recently lost their parents, and I talked about what a seismic shift that is in your way of looking at the world. It's a seismic loss.
Yeah, perfect. Seismic loss is our keyword for the 5 of Cups in the Urban Tarot. And the keyword is the Golden Dawn keyword is loss. But the title that's here on this card is, if you can see it, is disappointment, which I think is a little bit, it's so limiting when we get so much meat out of this image. It's like, this is not disappointment. Believe me, this is not like, oh, darn, another earthquake, another set of dishes smashed. That's disappointment, is the flowers got knocked over. Seismic loss is your heirloom dishes that your grandmother gave you got destroyed by the earthquake. There's 2 different things.
Which can also be very much a seismic shift in thinking and disillusionment more than disappointment.
Right, yeah, disillusionment is another good one. So yeah, so I think this is good, and I do think that you can get a lot of stuff out of this deck.
I just had a real quick thought, just because I'm an LA native, so yes, I've lived through many earthquakes. Oh my God. But what's interesting in that depiction of the 5 of Cups is that if it is, you know, like your great grandma's fine china set, you still have half of it, because some of those cups were still in piece, but now it's just no longer a complete set. So it sucks, because like you can now have a smaller dinner party and you can still use the fine china, but then you're going to have the IKEA dishes for the other half. So we just do what we can do, but it's no longer a complete set, but you can still get enjoyment out of using it, right? Or the memory. Yeah.
Excellent, and that's a really good, and even though this is technically a Thoth lineage deck, that's a really accurate interpretation that, again, once you expand out into, you know, when you're layering all your different decks together, that one will easily slip over onto the Rider-Waite-Smith. I definitely have cards that I don't know, that I have very different meanings for, depending on what deck I'm using. And so sometimes they easily slip over, slide into other decks. Sometimes they don't, and every once in a while I'll be reading with one deck, and another deck pops up, and it's like, okay, well, today we're not going to read this deck, we're reading the other deck that's popping into my mind. If you want to look at this deck, just go to her site, because she's got all the cards and you can easily take a look at them too.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to identify a keyword for your deck, or whatever imagery, as far as the props go, since generally like all of the cups card have cups in them, are the cups props or are they just the suit?
I call it the suit icon, and I don't really consider that fits under correspondences, because your very most basic correspondences are the suit and number. I mean, the suit and the element and the number, those are kind of the like baby level of correspondences. So I actually would consider it a correspondence. But I would note the number and the arrangement of the cups to get more meaning out of that.
Okay. Or maybe if the the wands are very active in a certain scene, maybe they could be used like the 5 of Wands. I mean, they're basically like, they're the wands, but they're also like kind of bats, because they are a prop, like they're using it to do something.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks everybody for coming, and goodbye to everybody that's leaving.
Thank you. That was great.
It was wonderful. Yeah, really good.
Really good. And
okay,
everybody.
thanks, Emily.
No, we're all buying at least 1 or 2 more decks, probably.